All right. One last complication to throw into the mix. And this is the complication of what's called polygenetic inheritance. Polygenetic, which means many genes. That's what poly means, many genes. Okay, so far we have understood that the traits that we see in someone are caused by genes, and we've looked at situations that involve the two different genes that we get. So let me just remind you that you'll have this chromosome. Whoops, that's a terrible picture. Let me just redraw that. You have this chromosome in your cells, right? And then during meiosis, that chromosome gets replicated. And then with it, there's another chromosome that's what we call homologous. It has the same genes on it, but it could have different alleles, right? Different forms. So if this is the homologous pair in your homologous chromosomes, they have similar genes on each one, but different alleles. So right up here in this spot, there might be a gene right here. And that gene is for, how long your toenails grow or something ridiculous. Over here, there will be a similar gene that does the same thing. They both control the growth of, say, toenails. But one might have toenails that grow sort of curly, and one might have toenails that grow sort of straight, right? And curly toenails might give you more ingrown toenails and foot problems. Who knows? But those two genes could have different alleles. So we would say, okay, this is the toenail gene. And the relationship between those alleles could be where one is dominant over the other. Could also be where one and the other one are co-dominant. Or it could be even a situation where there's incomplete dominance. So the way those two alleles interact could create all kinds of different situations. Okay, but what if something is controlled by more than one gene? All right, so what that means is, here's one chromosome, and here's its homologous pair. Here's another chromosome in your body, and its homologous pair. And here's a third chromosome in your body. You have 46, remember, and here's its homologous pair. So there's 23 possible pairs. And we're going to call this gene, there's a gene right here on this one, let's say. That's going to be gene A. And it's going to come in two forms. It's going to be an A and a little a. So it's the dominant and recessive, okay? But over here on this other picture, there's a whole other gene. Maybe it's down here. Different chromosome, different gene. We're going to call this little gene B. And it comes in two forms, a dominant and a recessive. And then over here on this other one, maybe down here, there's going to be a gene called gene C that comes in two forms, a dominant, and I'm going to have to draw my little c like that, a recessive. And it turns out that all of these three genes have a job to do. They all work together to produce skin tone in humans, human skin tone. So now, it's not just a capital A and a small a and figure it out. Now we have a capital A and a small a, which you could possibly get from your mom and your dad. And then we have a capital B and a small b that you would also get from another gene, from a whole other chromosome. And then we have the C and the capital C, which you could get from a whole other chromosome. So what we have now are three different genes all working on the same trait. So three different genes all controlling the same trait. This is going to get really complicated. And the example we're going to use is skin tone, how dark or light your skin is. Now, what are the combinations? Well, you could get a lot of different alleles. You're going to have in your, so let's put it this way. Dad could give you a capital A and mom could give you a small a, or vice versa. But dad's also could maybe give you a small b and mom could give you a large b, and dad's other chromosome could be a small c. Because it's three different genes, you're going to get a copy of each of these from mom and dad. So what does that mean? Look at the combinations you could get. Let me try and remember the colors. So A is blue, B is red, and C is green. So you could get a multitude of combinations. And you could get, so capital A, small a, maybe. And then you could end up getting, B was maybe two capital B's. And then maybe for C, you get a large C and a small c. That's only one combination out of, there's probably upwards of, there's 6 options. 6 times 5 is 30, times 4 is 120. Yeah, there's a million. There's lots of different combinations here. Okay, so how do you know how dark your skin's going to be? Well, it turns out that the dominant allele of all 3 of these genes makes you darker. So dominant combinations results in darker skin, and recessive results in lighter skin. So what you have to do is look at all the combinations and see the combination we have here. It has four dominant alleles, and it only has 2 recessive alleles. So the more dominant alleles you have for these 3 genes, the darker your skin will be. So the darkest possible skin would be all dominant alleles for both genes. That would be the darkest. And then the lightest possible skin, so you could go through all the combinations, the lightest possible skin would be all recessives. But because there's 3 genes and there's so many combinations, we can get all kinds of variations. Okay, so let me try to show you this in sort of a picture form. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write over here A, B, B, C, C. And this would be the lightest form. But what if you had only one dominant allele? There's 3 ways you could have that. So I'll draw that in blue here. You could have a capital A only and all the rest small. But what if you have 2 smalls and a capital B? Well, what if you have 2 smalls and a capital C? All 3 of these have one dominant allele, which would make your skin slightly darker than the other case. Now, what if you had 2? Well, there's more combinations, isn't there? If we do the combinations with 2, we would have, let's see, A, B, B, C, C. There's 2 capital letters, right? But maybe you have a capital A with a capital C instead. That's still 2 dominant letters. Maybe you don't have any capital A. Maybe you have a capital B with a capital C. Or maybe you have 2 capital A's. That could also happen. Or maybe you have 2 capital B's. Or 2 capital C's. So there are 6, this is with 2 dominant alleles, but there are 6 different situations. If we carry this on, what we'll find is there's 7 ways that you can get 3 capital letters, so 3 dominant genes. And then there's only 4 more ways of, well, actually not 4, sorry. 1, 2, 3. There'd be about 6 ways of getting 2 dominant again, right? 6 more ways of getting 3 dominant. This would be, 6 ways of getting 4 dominant alleles. 4 dominant. So we could just keep on doing this. And then you could also get 5 dominant, or then one more time, 6 dominant, which I can't squeeze in. So what happens is if you, rather than, draw all these genotypes out over and over, if you look at how many are dominant, if you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, how many are dominant? There's only one way for this, but there's 3 different ways for this. There's about 6 different ways to get this. There's about 7 different ways to get that. There's 6 different ways to get this, and there's 3 different ways to get that. Which means if you draw it in a graph form, you can see how the numbers get bigger in the middle like this. And this would be lightest skin tone, and over here would be darkest. And so what this means is because there's way more combinations in the middle, you're going to get more often than not, if there's no other factors in the population that are, selecting for certain genes, you have way more options at being sort of somewhere in the middle, sort of medium colored skin, and fewer options to be really dark or really light. So if you had a bunch of people and you put them all, you had them all breed in a controlled situation, eventually you'd have way more people with sort of medium colored skin. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, because as we're going to learn in our next unit, there's the whole thing of the environment you live in, and the environment can exert pressure for certain gene combinations. This is called natural selection and evolution, and we're going to learn how that works. So what we're talking about here is what's possible. What actually happens is actually more complicated yet, because it involves a whole other sort of mechanism that actually determines or helps to select which gene combinations a population has. But the concept here is just to understand that you can have multiple genes involved, polygenetic, multiple genes. So now you can have many different alleles, 2 for each gene, essentially. It's also possible to have multiple genes and multiple alleles. Maybe each of these genes has 2 or 3 or 4 alleles. You can see how complicated it would get. But the idea here in polygenetic inheritance is to remember that it's the number of dominants and recessives that you have that determines how the phenotype will go. And so in the case of skin, light, it goes with recessive. So the more recessive combinations you have, the lighter your skin is, right? This is the lightest right here. And the more dominant ones you have, the more darker your skin is. And so capitals all around would be the most darkest. And then all the combinations in between that can exist. And